Welcome to Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in the trailer for Loki. So the trailer opens with the scene from Endgame when Loki, in an alternate reality, stole the Tesseract and disappeared. This is showing us how Loki can still be alive when we all saw him die, for real. So just to explain what's going on here before we get into the Easter eggs. Like the Ancient One explained in Endgame, there are multiple realities branching off in different directions. Every time the Avengers time traveled, they created an alternate branching reality. It looks like this series is going to show Loki revisiting several different planes in the multiverse. And not for nothing, this is also going to happen in Doctor Strange and the untitled Spider-Man 3 movie. But more on that in a bit. When Loki is transported away, the effect looks just like the Bifrost transportation that we saw up close in Thor Ragnarok. Now it's interesting that the Tesseract works so much like the Bifrost. Now maybe, since Odin had the Tesseract thousands of years ago before he stored it on Earth, maybe Odin actually adapted this energy and technology to create the Bifrost to begin with. After all, we know that Odin used to be much more bellicose and tried to conquer the 9 realms by force. So perhaps he did this by using the Tesseract's power and energy, but when he realized the error of his ways, he knew that he couldn't be trusted with the Tesseract's power. He kept it on Earth, but he built a machine that operated on the same principles. He lands in what looks like the Gobi Desert, and now he does not have the Tesseract. You gotta think that's gonna come back into play at some point, because now there's a stray Tesseract just floating around the multiverse somewhere. His landing looks very much like Tony Stark's in Iron Man. Now maybe this is intentional, to show that just as this moment was the beginning of Tony's redemption, this one marks the moment Loki is going to start to turn his life around. Now notice the Marvel Studios logo has several different letters to spell the word Loki, which I think shows that we're going to have different Lokis from different realities appear in this show, but more on that in a minute. Then we see Loki inside the Time Variance Authority. So in the comics, this is a bureaucratic group that keeps track of all the different multiple realities, and they police people using time travel to change reality, which is exactly what the Avengers did in Endgame. Basically, if anybody gets too far out of line changing reality, they step in and apprehend them. He's wearing some kind of collar, which might be a power suppressing collar like mutants are forced to wear in the comics. Or maybe this collar pulls a Suicide Squad if he steps out of line. So what's going on here? What is the TVA doing? Well, I think that they have recruited Loki to be an agent. Later in the trailer, we see him in a shirt and tie with a TVA jacket, much like an FBI agent. In the elevator, he's talking to Owen Wilson, who's playing Mobius M. Mobius. He's kind of a middle manager from the TVA, whose look is based on the comic book writer who created him, Mark Grunwald. Now, he's actually named after the impossible shape, the Mobius strip. But if you remember, this geometric shape was also the key to unlocking time travel.
This time in the shape of a Mobius strip, inverted.
And then we see shots of the TVA soldiers, the chronomonitors. Now, if you look in the background, these look like the same people that found Loki in the desert. So my guess is that they have come into this tent in the desert to apprehend Loki. Then we see shots of several hooded figures throughout the trailer fighting these same soldiers from the TVA. I think these hooded figures are actually Lokis from other realities, and that the TVA has recruited Loki to help them reel himself in. This is symbolized by this mirror containing several different reflections of Loki. Maybe he's able to look in it and see multiple versions of himself from across the multiverse, which is why he calls it glorious. After all, they seem to know Loki pretty well.
Because we both know you love to talk.
Now we see Loki going to trial in front of a high-ranking TVA agent. These three faces more than likely represent Justice Love, Justice Peace, and Justice Goodwill from the comics. We also see statues of them later on. Now notice these stacks of books in the TVA. This reminds me of the Halls of the All-Knowing from the Thor comics. This is the home of the Divine Archives, which contain the knowledge of every event that has ever happened, which would be very useful for the TVA. Now we see a little bit of this briefing with Loki, which I think takes place after his trial as they're recruiting him to work for the TVA. We see the TVA logo turn into Loki, standing just like the statue he built for himself in Thor Ragnarok. There's also the ending of the Avengers, which is interesting because it shows that they have access to all the knowledge of anything Loki's ever done from his own point of view. I'm guessing they show Loki what happened to him in his other timeline, including his death, which is why he looks away here. So their pitch to him is, look, you are gonna die, so instead you can come work for us. One of Loki's missions is at a department store called Roxcart. This is more than likely owned by Roxxon. In the Marvel comics, they're a corrupt corporation who has their fingers in a lot of different pies, and they've menaced everyone from Thor to Iron Man. We've seen them previously in the MCU several times, including in the background of Iron Man, and featured more prominently in the Agent Carter TV show. Now, as Loki's fighting in the store, a hooded figure is watching him via security monitors. Again, I think all of these hooded figures are actually Loki in disguise, the Loki from another reality. reality. Now, at one point here, we see Mobius standing in front of a stained glass window. I think that this is Mr. Alternity. He's the secretive head of the TVA. Or, given his demonic look, he could be Mephisto, who's basically the devil in Marvel Comics.
Be you angels.
The person Mobius is talking to looks very similar to this character we see later in the trailer. Now, this could be the character played by Sofia De Martino. This might be part of her training as a child, but then she becomes a rogue agent of the TVA who Loki has to reel in. We also see Loki doing his cool knife trick that we saw in Ragnarok as he faces off against this TVA person. Now in this story, he faces off with a clone of Larry the Cable Guy, and I think it's interesting that he seems to be overpowered by this dude when he's a god. So my theory is the TVA either saps away Loki's powers, they put a power dampening collar on him, or this guy is more than he appears. And then we get looks of all these different weird realities. There's one where it looks like the moon has exploded. Now, this could be because of Thanos. Remember, he's exploded moons before. It also reminded me of Season 5 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when the Earth in the future has been quaked apart by graviton. Now, in this reality right here, this looks like Natasha, Black Widow, with her hair from Infinity War, just sitting on a rock and watching all this happen. Or maybe this takes place on Vormir. Maybe there's an alternate reality where Hawkeye sacrificed himself for the stone and she's left there pondering that she let her best friend die. Either way, it'd be pretty cool to see Natasha appear in this series along with other Avengers getting cameos. Let me know what Avenger you would most like to see appear in this show down in the comments below. In another reality, we see him appear in post-apocalyptic New York with Avengers Tower shattered in the background, but this fire hydrant is strangely intact. Now, judging by what he's wearing, a shirt and tie and a jacket, this is after he takes a job working for the TVA. As for how this happened, I'm going to take a wild guess. It looks like the whole city has been kind of smushed together, as if pushed there by a giant shockwave. The kind of shockwave that would have been created from Sokovia falling from the sky in Age of Ultron. So maybe in this reality, Ultron partially succeeded and it devastated the entire world, including smushing Manhattan together. Notice Avengers Tower in the background, meaning this apocalyptic event took place after the events of the Avengers. Also, how cool would it be if they were just in the shawarma joint for this? Now, there's some other cool bits from this post-apocalyptic New York that I'm going to get into in just a minute. There's another cool sequence here with Loki on an airplane, grabbing a suitcase full of money and jumping out. This looks like that he's actually D.B. Cooper. Now, as for D.B. Cooper's real name, we don't know who this guy is. So D.B. Cooper extorted $200,000 before hijacking a plane. He parachuted away, but nobody ever caught him. All they found was some tattered bills in a river. When Kevin Feige talked about the Loki show, they said they were going to show him causing mischief throughout the centuries. So maybe several mysterious people who history has never been able to name turned out to actually be Loki. For instance, in this shot, we see Loki dancing with a girl in what appears to be ancient Rome. So he might encounter himself, say, encouraging Julius Caesar to claim he's Emperor of Rome. You can see him get snatched away by a Bifrost here. Now, I think this is happening because Odin has watched Loki steal this money and he's bringing him back to Asgard for punishment. In fact, this might not even be our Loki. This is probably one of the multiple Lokis from other universes that I was talking about earlier. So, back to Dystopia New York, where we see this version of Loki with his smaller horns from the comics standing with these Mad Max characters, one of whom has license plates for armor. Now notice all these dudes are dressed as Asgardian Mad Max characters. This guy's horns are made from bicycle handlebars, and this one has a hammer similar to Thor's. It's like Loki's conquered this universe, but he's forced everybody to become a junkyard version of Asgard. But if you're a fan of Mad Max, no doubt you're going to recognize this character. This is your mom. And you see that he and the other guys are wearing pins that say, "Vote Loki." This is a nod to the terrific 2016 comic book of the same name, where Loki runs and almost wins the presidency. Also, notice his tie clip is actually based off of his normal costume from the Avengers. And here's my favorite Easter egg from the trailer. This arcade machine in the background is called Polybius. Now, this is not actually a real arcade machine, but it's an urban myth. So the way the story goes, there was an arcade game that appeared in Oregon, and the rumor was that it was funded by the government, and it made people into addicts, and it got them really high, and that people were lined up around the corner to play this thing. It was all part of some government experiment in mind control. So maybe Loki actually did create this machine, it ended the world, and now he gets to be King of the Ashes. Well, that's all the Easter eggs I found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below, or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.